Yeah, just as a heads up, I mentioned in the green room as a heads up, I'm a little bit under the weather, so I'll be a little more Barry White than Barry Manilow today. I think is kind of the will be the voice difference. But thanks for hanging in there with me, everybody.
It's good as long as we don't have to sit next to you.
No, not at all. I'll try not to breathe through the mic. Alex, you're in a different spot today. You look like you're on the road, yeah?
Yeah, I'm right now. If I'm looking right, it's to the sound down that way, but more likely you'll see me staring out that window at the North Carolina beach. So you can feel bad for me. It's okay.
No, I don't even a little. Yeah. Is it family holiday?
It is. Yeah, we're down here for a week, so we've gotten really lucky with the weather so far. The forecast was pretty bad, but we've had mostly sun, so all good.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, is
we'll
that a repeat?
We'll be in North Carolina in August, right, Chris?
We are headed to Charlotte, where we'll be at the Spectrum headquarters. Very excited about that. Employment branding.
Yeah, it's pretty close. It's only a 6-hour drive to Charlotte from here, so
right around the corner.
No beach.
Yeah, for Texas standards, it's right next door.
Yeah, we toy with the idea. This is so off topic. We toy with the idea of this little fantasy of getting. I tell Jerry this all the time, like a camper van. And we just recently did this family gathering in July, and with maybe 12 of us together, and all of them literally have camper vans. They have these vans their families have that they go. Well, they're all in the Pacific Northwest and in California, and all of them think we're bananas, absolutely bananas for even thinking about a van in Texas, because it takes 2 days to date on the van, which I said is pretty reasonable. Yeah. Meanwhile, Jerry has an entire home on wheels, and he'll just go anywhere.
I love it.
Are you taking the camper back to Wreckfest in September, Jerry?
I am.
That's pretty awesome.
I made the deal that I'll be literally alone on a street next to the entry to Wreckfest, so I can do campfires and whatever. I have all the accoutrements that I'll set up, and as long as the state police don't come and shut me down, it'll be enjoyable.
Jay, if we get you a reflective vest, I don't think they'll mess with you. If you're standing at the entrance, I don't think they're going to mess with you. I have learned in my travels that nobody messes with the guy either with a clipboard or a reflective vest.
I like that idea, because late at night, there's barriers to get on the street, but I'd like to look like I'm officially appropriate there.
You look officially appropriate anywhere, I promise. All right. Well, on that note, are we ready to get started, gentlemen?
Yes, sir.
All right, here we go.
CXR Channel, our premier podcast for talent acquisition and talent management. Listen in as the CXR community discusses a wide range of topics focused on attracting, engaging, and retaining the best talent. We're glad you're here.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to another Recruiting Community podcast. We do weekly insights and updates in the form of a conversation. I am your host, Bob Hope, and I have with me Bing Crosby. Bing, how are you?
I'm looking for that white Christmas. It's still a little hot out here.
There you go. Well played. We have a guest today, Alex Murphy. He is the CEO, founder over at JobSync, and we recently co-facilitated a research panel with Alex. Alex did this with us at Career Crossroads, addressing conflicts of interest, and we did this with about 40 TA leaders and experts. Today, we're going to share some of those learnings and recommendations that came out of that from that panel and how to improve transparency within talent acquisition. But a few things first, we're streaming on the YouTube, the Facebook, the LinkedIn. I think we're on the Twitch, but you can check out where we're at cxr.org/podcast. You can get future and past episodes there as well. You can kind of see what's going on. We are also available anywhere that you subscribe. So if you're listening on the Spotify or in, the Apple Music or wherever you may be listening, go ahead and subscribe. That helps. It's just a nice confirmation for us. It's a reminder this is an ad-free labor of love. So Jerry and I don't do this because it brings in any revenue. We do this because people are doing cool stuff. We want to say hello. I want to hear what they have to say. And that brings me to you. If you are following with us along on LinkedIn today, we're going to ask for you to just say hello in the chat window. If you've got a question for our guest today or for Jerry and I, just pop it in there. We may throw it up on the screen and do that. So I think the only other thing I want to remind people about, I lied. There's two things. In the bottom corner, you can see that on Jerry's face, if you're watching with us on the treadmill, there is a QR code that is for the CXR Foundation. That's a 501c3 nonprofit that we have founded a couple of years ago. Last year, we raised almost $34,000. That money goes towards scholarships and a couple of other projects that are underway. Those scholarships go to help talent acquisition professionals and their families, so not just the TA professionals, but in their families, continue their education towards any number of things that they are passionate about. So we're pretty excited about that. And Jerry, I don't know, you want to chime in on that as well?
No, I think it's an extraordinarily useful way to pay it forward. And, the only thing we ask of almost anybody who asks how they can help is pay it forward. You're going to find opportunities out there.
Yeah, I love that. Show up, have an opinion, and lean all the way forward. The other thing we'll remind you about, CXR Marketplace has been released. We're super excited about this. We've got well over 400 talent acquisition industry vendors and solution providers that sit in there. I think we're closing in at 7,000 ratings that have been added. Ratings and reviews have been added, not just by members now. We've opened that up, so absolutely anybody can head out there at cxr.work/marketplace. And you can check those out. You can drop your own ratings. And once you've rated, I think about 3 or more of those, community features begin to get unlocked. So you can actually dive in and connect with others who are using those services. And I will do a reminder to everybody, the way that this platform has been developed and designed by our, by our TA leaders. We're not glass dooring it. So neutral or negative NPS scores will not be, the ratings, the review that is written will not be published. The scores will, that will be taken into account for those rankings and those scores. But when a neutral or negative NPS score is submitted, a prompt is delivered to give anonymous feedback to that vendor, that solution provider, and it goes directly to them. They'll never know who sent that in, but that's certainly a really great way to give some constructive feedback or some criticism about that product and help them continue to improve. I don't know, Jerry, you want to add anything to that?
No, I love it. It's I think the critical function is that there's user ratings by the people who actually do the work with it. So we're not offering special incentives for you to rate stuff.
Yeah, you'll get no coffee cards, Amazon shopping cards, or anything like that. So if there's a rating in there, it's because somebody felt compelled to do so. So it's a good call out. All right. Well, I think we're about ready for our guest to come in. As a reminder, cxr.work/marketplace. So there you go. That's the end of that. And we can bring our guest in now, all the way from Nantucket, or where are you again, Alex?
Topsail, North Carolina. It's down near Wilmington, North Carolina, about 45 minutes northeast.
Nice. I love it. Well, thanks for dialing in. I know you're on family time, so we appreciate you.
Absolutely. Love to be here.
So, Alex, for those who don't know you, who've not had literally the pleasure of getting some time with you, why don't you give us kind of an elevator pitch, right? Who is Alex Murphy, and why are we listening to him today?
Fair enough. So, longtime job board operator. I was a co-founder at job.com, was at Beyond before they became Next, and then joined up with my partner, John Bell, to start JobSync in 2019. Next week, we actually will celebrate our 2000th day of business. So we've been at this for a few years. What we're trying to solve for is to create a much more seamless process of finding candidates for employers and for those candidates to be able to find and apply to jobs that are of interest to them. We kind of describe it as creating an Amazon-like experience, regardless of where that person might be finding that job opportunity, be it on a job board like Indeed or ZipRecruiter, or on media sites like Facebook and TikTok. So we're trying to help streamline the application process and elevate and increase the recruitment advertising performance for large enterprise employers.
Love it. I love it. And so what we're here together today, we want to talk a little bit about is the panel and the study that we recently did. For those who don't know, CXR does for the last year, we've been doing these quarterly research reports. They're 4 to 5 week asynchronous panels that are done anywhere from, I think, 30 to upwards of 50 plus talent acquisition professionals, leaders, practitioners, influencers, if you will, have been part of this. And we have since published quarterly reports. I think I'm going to throw a link up on there, cxr.work/report. I think /research will also get you there, but you can see the latest that's been published. But we've done a number of these. And then the one that we have worked on recently with you, Alex, is in the final throes of the creative aspect of it. So we're almost published with it, but we have done 4 blog posts on the topic of transparency and conflict of interest within talent acquisition. So I know what that means to me. Do either one of you want to take a swipe at sort of explaining to folks what do we mean when we say conflict of interest in TA?
Sure, I'll lead off. So I think last fall, Jerry and I had a conversation talking about, I'll say, misaligned incentives. And so this conflict of interest is really a derivative of that, and it's coming from this perch, again, kind of historically from job board space, where end customers were getting input and recommendations and advice that were, let's say, the thumb was on the scale for what it was that that was driving that recommendation. And so, several years on, we're watching this kind of change, the dynamics in the market change, and kind of things have gotten and ballooned into a number of different areas where that conflict of interest arises. And basically it's when the incentive or the reason that a recommendation is being made is not disclosed to the person or by the person making the recommendation to the person that is asking for that recommendation. And therefore, they're not necessarily getting the best advice in the world. They're getting, let's say, weighted advice.
Or slightly, the incentives really of whether or not the the customer understands what's going on is all based on transparency. If the vendor or the supplier is not really providing full disclosure about where their financial income comes from, if it's coming from 2 or 3 different places, if they're getting consulting fees as well as kickbacks, they need to defend that their decision to take that is based upon their understanding of how good that particular product or service happens to be. And that way they might be able to defend it. But everybody who's paying should have full disclosure from the vendor or supplier about what's going on.
Yeah, excuse me. And I'll just share a little backstory from my perspective why this one piqued my interest is because years ago, and I think I shared this during the panel years ago, I was at a small conference and there was a speaker who got up on the stage. And that speaker mentioned that, look, they're not getting paid by anybody that they're going to mention today, but they've got some top technologies and top solutions that folks should be checking out. And about the third one through, I thought, well, I thought they were on the payroll with that organization. So I stepped out of the session. I called the CEO of that vendor provider, and I said, hey, do you know so-and-so? And they said, oh yeah, we pay them. And I'll just pick a number here for you, but I'm downing. We pay them about $3,000 every time they mention us on stage. And so now I'm going back into the session, and I said, well, you're getting your money's worth today, certainly. But now I'm going back into the session, and it's a completely different light, right, that I'm seeing this presenter in for eternity. Like now in perpetuity, I now look at this person and I don't trust a word they say when they're telling me that I should check this or that out. So I think this one, when this topic came up, I'm like, this is a big one, because I think this happens probably way more often than we think it does.
So it's funny, right? Like the point on the speaker side, it's rare that somebody now says I'm not getting paid and they get paid, because that's like an explicit lie. But it's the absence of disclosure that they are on the payroll and they come across as though they're a researcher. Hey, me and my team, we've done all this research and we've looked at all the various tools. And let me tell you about these 7 that I think are pioneering and that they're innovative and that they're this and they're that. And they're all also on in my client list, right? I'm giving them advice, I'm an advisor or whatever, but they don't say any of that part out loud, right? They come across and they stand on stage. And yes, if you go dig and you double click into the various places deep into their websites, you might find that they're listed as an advisor, but 999 out of 1,000 people don't do that. They just take it on the surface as that's a thought leader in the space. They've got a keynote today. They're telling me all this good, impartial, objective and giving me this objective advice, when they're not. In reality, they're very much leaning in the direction of a paid contract.
Yeah, and I think, and I want to give you a chance to talk to Jerry, obviously, but I think it's important to call out that nobody has a problem with anybody getting paid, or being on a payroll. What we're really talking about is just being transparent and being open about that transaction or that agreement. So we're certainly not saying that consultants or these quote unquote influencers or these analysts should not be getting paid for their time or for getting up on stage or for talking about this or for that. But we're saying you should be a little more open about it.
So when you break down all of the different aspects of our industry, you have the conferences, and what is their responsibility to ensure that there's some kind of transparency, or the analysts themselves who, yes, they get sponsored to produce some of the work that they do. But the issue is they should be defending the fact that that sponsorship does not impact their impartiality in terms of what they're doing. And they can do that by being more transparent, as well as consultants who are paid by companies to help them pick the right technology. Part of the issue that makes me really want to move the needle on this is that our industry has gone from maybe 20, 30 years ago, a focus on putting ads in newspapers. So we knew the only technology was how you did that, to the incredible amounts of money that's being spent on various kinds of tools, technologies, and services that enhance the capabilities of folks to hire people. And we're now going from, probably tens of billions of dollars to probably close to hundreds of billions.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of money at stake.
Yeah, easily. Let me share really quickly. I've got a list. I'll pull it up here. I think we had about 42 people that were part of the program, but we had about 18 that we'd really highlight who really leaned all in on the conversations. And I'll just run through these really quickly to give you some weight of the idea, but sort of behind like who's leaning in on the topic, right? So head of TA for Americas and Asia at GXO, director of strategic partnership at Wells Fargo. I think we also head of strategy and global TA transformation at Wells Fargo, CEO of Vector, VP of marketing at Plum, VP of TA Global Payments Inc., the CEO at Sparkstart, founder of IA, managing partner at M Squared Advisors, VP strategic consulting at HireClicks, the president of Shaker Recruitment Marketing. Won't be hard to figure out who that is. High volume EVP for AMS. And then I think we've got VP of strategy and research at Workday. And a couple of others from a talent acquisition consultant, director of TA to startup. And then obviously, Alex, you had joined in as a co-facilitator there, which was a sponsored position, full disclosure, right? Sponsored position there. And in that role, you got to help sort of shape the questions and the polls, surveys, and the final output. So it gives you an idea of people who are leaning in. This is not it's kind of an undercurrent, I feel like, of a conversation taking place, but super important. And I think just now getting a little more attention that it deserves.
I think one of the things that we're hoping comes out of this is the ability of having a collective voice. There are an awful lot of vendors as well as talent acquisition leaders doing some really great work within their companies and for the industry itself. But collectively, I think we have a much louder voice, one that's more influential. And if not only the folks who weighed in on this report are willing to in effect talk about that, but if others who are influenced by them also join in, we can call out and engage others, I think, to change the way in which we approach this transparency. And I do think it has an impact on the perception of the candidates and others who go through a recruiting process, that in the end, we hope they see it as something that is fair. But the more they see the unfairness, if you will, of the lack of transparency in all of these areas, the more likely their conclusion is that, that there's something amiss in terms of the journey that they're on when they're looking for a job.
Yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
Well, I was just going to say, there are a number of places where data was surfaced, through the various surveys and so forth in the platform. And I thought one of the ones that's worth calling out at this point is, there was a question about what's the impact of the presence of conflict of interest in this industry. And I think one of the things that was interesting, I'll speak to the data in 1 second, but one of the things I think that's really interesting is it really wasn't a question about whether or not there is a conflict of interest in our space. And I think that that's the case because I think it's inherently obvious to most people that just simply ask a question of or dig into what is your motivation? Why are you giving me the recommendation? Why are you saying what you're saying? And it becomes very obvious. You can't really unsee it once you've seen it. Across all those leaders that you were just discussing, Chris, the consensus was that 0 people, and obviously these are the people leaning into this conversation. So it's not, it's the sample of the survey is obviously driven, in fact, by people that are taking an interest in this. But 0 out of all the people that that participated in this program thought there was no impact, and more than a third thought that the impact was relatively extreme in terms of the impact that this conflict of interest has on the space. And it bears out to what you were just discussing, Jerry. The impact is inefficiency in recruiting. So you end up selecting and adding tools that maybe aren't actually beneficial to your organization. Maybe they create more clutter. Josh Burson brought up this idea of the kitchen drawer problem of technologies that companies have last year. Josh kind of got called out a little bit in the survey for maybe having some of the lack of disclosures. But I think, at the same time, he also is calling out the fact that many companies, I should say, have a real problem where they have tools that they bring on, but they don't actually get used and they get kind of put into the drawer and you renew. So why does that happen? Well, it's happening because people are getting advice to add them as though they're some magic bullet when they're not, or maybe they're not the right tool for that company. And so the incentive isn't around creating better outcomes for the clients. It's actually just selling more product, which is driving up this kind of cost escalation that you were talking about, Jerry. So a third think it's extreme, and roughly half think it's moderate. So that's pushing about 85% think it's moderate or extreme in terms of the impact. That's a huge percentage of people thinking that this has really tilted the scale in this space. I think it's kind of unusual because most other, categories of services, whether it's in sales or DevOps and so forth, they don't seem to have the same problem existing in those arenas.
Yeah, I think it's when we talk about what impacts do we anticipate any changes might have, like just from a talent acquisition standpoint, right? And I think that came up a few times in some of the conversations, like, well, what difference will it make? Does this have an impact on how we recruit? And I have to say that I think the biggest impact for me, as it continued to float up was speed. Because I think when you've got an increased level of trust, you're able to make decisions more confidently and more quickly. And I think, I mean, in a time when all we're talking about is optimization, right? And we're talking about recruiting faster and moving faster, I think that's a big one.
I think that one of the things I hope comes out of this is that as we articulate specific recommendations, so for example, with a conference, that the conference requires of its speakers that they put a slide on their deck as an example. And that one slide should identify any perceived conflict of interest that might exist for any of the products or services that they're going to talk about in the session. And they can use that to defend, in effect, that they do, in fact, look for ways in which they can make money from those vendors or suppliers, and that they pick those that they really like and really have studied well, that kind of thing. I'm fine with that, as long as there's transparency around that. And that's one example. If we as an industry can be more effective in doing things like that, I think we're going to actually become much more viable in terms of how we're perceived by the stakeholders in our space.
Yeah, Jerry, I'll add to that. I threw up on the screen for those who are watching. Adam Fitzer, who's a CXR member, longtime member, had commented and said, "Look, I'm not expecting impartiality when I'm at an Indeed or LinkedIn conference. I am expecting transparency at, say, a RecFest or an HR Tech." And I think that's
right.
like a nice.
But a LinkedIn conference, or for example, does have a great number of presenters, if you will, who may or may not be on the boards of the products and services that they're dealing with.
Yeah.
Or very active within Indeed itself and or LinkedIn, et cetera. So, and HR Tech was very clear that if you are a speaker at HR Tech, you have paid something to be the speaker.
Yeah, and there are other conferences. I get the difference between a user conference and an industry conference, but I think that conflict still resides within. I think, to your point, Jerry, still resides within those user conferences to some degree. I do want to call out Maury Hannigan, who just added a comment. Also, it's not just the number of tools; it's also the cost, because those kickbacks are ultimately paid by the customer.
Exactly.
And I think, so one of the drivers, right, about this conversation Jerry and I had last year is the variability in that kickback, right? Mm-hmm. So you could be promoting a service, and let's say that you get a kickback from all of the various vendors that you're kind of putting together in an offering and so forth to a customer. But if you're making, let's say, 30% from this vendor A versus 10% from vendor B, and vendor A is getting the recommendation, and you kind of present it as saying, yes, we get a commission from everybody. Okay, fine. We recommend vendor A on these merits. It's like, okay, but was that really just the merits, or does the fact that you make twice as much money maybe play in? And if you told the person, I make 30% over in this deal and 15% on this deal, then at least the customer can include that in their evaluation, right? Yes. But if you hide it, right, yeah, and you give them all of the other information except that one piece, that's material in terms of the non-disclosure. And I think that's happening more and more often because, lots of vendors want to go out and play in this space and say, look, we'll pay a bounty. If you recommend us in front of everybody else, it's a competitor, we'll give you extra money, give you a kickback, 100%. But that's actually not really good for long-term health in terms of the relationships. So
Alex, I fully agree with you. I want to change the language just a little bit, because you use the term bounty and you use the term kickback, and they could have some negative approach in terms of that. Let's use referral or let's use commission, because there are a number of agencies whose who have a baseline of about 15% traditionally that a product or service would give them for their referral, for their movement, etc. And when that's true for every tool or product or service, it pretty much is a level playing field. It's how they make money. And it's pretty easy to be transparent about that. But obviously, if somebody then decides, oh, my competitors are paying 15%, I'll pay 30%, there's an expectation that they would be in the mix and chosen more often in order for them to support that. And all we're saying is that transparency is going to be key so that the customer can be the one that makes the choice as to whether that conflict of interest is perceived or real.
I'd add to that. There was an interesting. It took a little bit of a turn when it got to procurement. There was a conversation that took place on the panel that I thought was really interesting, in that a lot of the leaders were like, "Look, my procurement team usually takes this on, but doesn't know what the hell to ask because they're dealing with vendors in every function, right, in every business line." And just saying, "Hey, do you have a conflict of interest?" isn't cutting it.
Right.
And asking for a disclosure piece there. I don't know if that struck either of you as kind of it's kind of a no duh moment if we've ever dealt with our own internal or procurement departments before, because they don't. I mean, they're going through their red line and they're doing their thing. I don't expect them to be experts in every line of business. But I found that pretty enlightening, that most of the TA leaders were just saying, look, they just don't know what they don't know. And we wish we had something else to add to that for them.
Well, that's I think tantamount to why it's really our participants who are really driving the fact that we're part of the recommendations is what we could add to an RFI or RFP that helps either purchasing and or others who are sending that out or developing it to ask some more specific questions that cover that issue around transparency. So I think, in the end, that was really, I think, an interesting moment.
Yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead, Alex. Sorry.
I was just going to say, the part of the problem is that the damage is kind of already done, right? Because it's like once it gets to procurement, you're really at the contractual phase, right? One of the things that I've seen kind of on repeat from most of our clients, which I really appreciate, is like a whistleblower type of provision that says, like, if somebody that is in the decision-making role as the buyer is asking for kickback, that you should report that. And I think that's an important part. It's a little bit different than the recommendations and referrals that we've been talking about, but it does get into some of the same mechanics. You don't want to have somebody that's in a budgetary buying role inside of your client as a vendor. I don't want to have somebody that's expecting to get a little bit of something on the other side and isn't just selecting based on the merits.
Yeah.
And so if more procurement organizations or parts of businesses can adopt that same type of methodology and require statements of alignment, I think that's going to be a major driver of creating the change that we're seeking here.
I think that's very true for public firms specifically. One of the areas of conflict of interest that has been pretty traditionally approached by large companies has been people in leadership positions who are making buying decisions, basically have, as part of onboarding their company, have made significant, have written, if you will, into the contract of working for that company that they will abide by conflict of interest rules. I kind of wonder whether some of the fractional folks who are now being hired in key leadership positions in a lot of companies are signing the same kind of contract. It'd be kind of interesting to see.
Yeah, I think we need a whole nother podcast episode on just fractional, this emergence of fractional, outside of CMO, CFO, but into the TA space, one level down of the C-suite. Whole nother conversation. But I will add to that. It's in final stages of review from all our panelists. We have put together a rider that can be added. Any organization, we will release this like we did the last output, one of the last outputs when we did from an AI RFI RFP for AI claims within your vendor solutions. We did that 24 questions. I think we had about 30 organizations or so kind of put that piece together. We published it under a Creative Commons license. We're doing the same thing with this writer. We'll release that for folks, but it's pretty extensive and it's in the final rounds of that. So that's kind of going to be a fun output. For anybody who grabs the report. I will remind everybody, I'm going to throw it up on the screen. It's not there yet today, but it'll be there shortly. It's just cxr.work/report. And if you go there today, I think you can download the last report that we did. You can also go to /research versus report. So cxr.work/research, grab the last two reports and opt in if you'd like to be in the latest report and research piece that's kicking off. And I think we're doing the intersection of employment branding and recruitment marketing right now. So that'll be a fun one. So you can check those pieces out if you want to get more information on it. Alex, I know we're wrapping up here. And I know we've got a report. We got a big 30-something page report that's coming out. We've done 4 blog posts on the topic. I don't want to beat it to death, but I'm going to ask you if you were going to craft a book today on this subject and the research we've done over the last 5 weeks with this pretty amazing group of folks. What would you title that book?
Speak hard truths.
Speak hard truth.
Cool.
Yeah, it's really difficult to actually follow through on addressing conflicts of interest. It is, you have to say, this is how I'm getting paid. You have to kind of show your cards. And that is, that's hard to say out loud. I think in a lot of these conversations, people hide the reality.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Look, I'll share this. I shared this in a podcast, or not a podcast, excuse me, in a LinkedIn comment last week that Jerry, you were on, so you probably saw it. And Jerry knows this, obviously, but we get asked all the time if we serve on a panel or an advisory board or in some capacity to do that. And we draw a hard line in that we won't, because if we say, hey, someone should check out JobSync, or hey, someone should check out whatever, thanks Elon Musk, I can't say X anymore. But should check out whatever. We want them to know that it's because we're telling them it's cool and you should look at it, or we like what we're seeing here, you should give it some attention. And one of the examples we gave, and we'll put a number on it, I think in the spirit of transparency, we had a vendor who came to us and said, look, we've got quite a bit of business that has come from conversations that we know came out of CXR. We'd really like to put you on our list of people who get spiffed, who get commissioned for this. And the last account would have been a $300,000 check. Well, I mean, we're a small business. $300,000 is not a small chunk of change for us, right? And we just can't. I mean, and you look at that number and you go, "Ooh, I could see where that's mighty tempting for a lot of people." But we know that if we cross that line, if we took that, the next time we were to tell somebody that they should check something out, that doesn't necessarily resonate. We lose our impartiality. We lose our ability to say it's because we like it, not because we like it and we're getting paid. So I think my point in kind of sharing that is I think everybody's sort of delineates that line is going to be a little bit different. But I think that it's a really big deal to be able to say, here's where my line is, and here's the compensation that I do get, or here's that kickback or spiff or bounty or whatever you want to call it on the other end of that, and just being open about it. But there are others who, like our business model, for instance, we just simply cannot cross that line.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting what you just described, right? That $300,000 spiff. It's kind of like winning the lottery, right? Is what they're saying. Like, hey, your conversations result in you winning the lottery, but that would make your business bankrupt, which is what happens to most lottery winners, is that they end up spending all the money and going down on the other side. So I applaud your commitment to stay true to yourself.
I love the paths that this is why I like talking to Alex. And Alex, I even mentioned, we had a late night in the hotel lobby at our last meeting that you were at. And I think we talked till 1 a.m. with a group of people. And I just love the way your brain works. You take that right to the lottery and then bankruptcy. There's always, the moral of the story is the subtitle of your book could be, there's always time to fuck it up.
How about take the other side, which is don't fuck it up.
There you go. It's Jerry's solid advice he gives to me on the weekly. Yeah, it's definitely on the reg. Look, Alex, present company excluded. Who will you give the first signed copy of your book to?
Oh, goodness. Probably to my wife. I have to speak all of the hard truths with her, that's for sure.
I love that. Well, Alex, I want to thank you so much for your time. Much gratitude. I know you're super busy, and we're just excited to have you on. It was an absolute pleasure to do the panel with you and that research. I hope we get to do another one and continue to group up. And I'm looking forward to seeing you. We're going to see you, I think, coming up in October and on the road. So looking forward to that.
Absolutely. Thank you for letting me do it. And I appreciate you guys engaging us on the topic.
A lot of fun. Nobody's mad. Well, they're not mad about it yet. We'll see who gets mad when the report comes out. All right.
Exactly.
Thanks,
I'm sure they'll disclose what their feelings are.
Oh, yes. There'll be full disclosure. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see everybody next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the CXR channel. Please subscribe to CXR on your favorite podcast resource and leave us a review while you're at it. Learn more about CXR at our website, cxr.works, facebook.com and twitter.com/careercrossroads, and on Instagram @careerxroads. We'll catch you next time.